Hi everyone.
Hello again. We thought to do a series on this book, which most of you will know, the official history book of the Watchtower, published in 1993, Jehovah's Witnesses, Proclaimers of God's Kingdom. That's 5 years after we had left, so we were very eager, having left and already done public demonstrations against the Watchtower, to hear what they were going to do to spin their history in the light of what had happened in those 5 years since we had left and the 10 years before we left. A lot of negative publicity. For the first time since World War II, maybe, a lot of negative publicity against the Watchtower, and most of it being generated by ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. When we were in, of course, the book didn't exist. Our official history book was this one, published in 1959, Jehovah's Witnesses and the Divine Purpose. And I had asked my study conductor, Bob, back in 1970, if you had an official history. He brought me this book, and it did the job. It seemed very transparent. They were confessing their errors in the past, and that was not only comforting, but it was reassuring that this organization had nothing to hide. At the same time as I was reading this book, though, around the same time, so it would be 1970, early 71, before I got baptized, I had met a very nice chap called Dennis, who was a Baptist, and he had given me a copy of William Schnell's book, 30 Years a Watchtower Slave. And that covered the same material as this book, but with a far different spin.
And a bitter tone, right?
He was, by that time, an evangelical Christian. Schnell wrote several books, and this was his most famous. And at that time, it was the book on Jehovah's Witnesses, written by an ex-witness. But when I weighed the shocking stuff in there against the presentation of some of the same material in this book, I guess I wasn't sufficiently impressed to stop my course, and I did get baptized because what Schnell was saying, the bitterness of the tone. Yeah. But also the fact that neither Dennis, my Baptist friend, nor Schnell dealt with the badge issues, that is, the name, Jehovah, the kingdom, the proclamation, door to door. So none of the criticisms got rid of the major issues as far as I was concerned. So I got baptized. And you had a completely different take, though, when finally you got around to reading this book. Yeah. After knowing some stuff.
That's right. So when I read that book, I didn't read it while I was a witness, really, until I was already investigating the history of the Watchtower. I don't even know if I knew about that book, but all I remember is I had already spent time reading Russell and Rutherford when you were reading, when you first got acquainted with the Witnesses. You read all the books into the 50s, right?
Just back to about 52, I think. Yeah. That's all that they were distributing at that point.
So for me, I had just been given permission to read the books in the library at the Kingdom Hall. And so I was reading Russell and Rutherford, and the early books.
Undiluted?
Yeah.
Unfiltered.
And finding that extremely disturbing. So when I read this book, I found it equally disturbing.
That's the Divine Purpose book.
The Divine Purpose book, because the Divine Purpose book, was making excuses. It was covering over things. I found it deceptive. Yeah. In its nature. But I can see if you read it without knowing the past, the early days, you would probably be okay with it. But I found it very disturbing.
You would think the same as you would with this book, that they're being transparent. This book is twice as big as the Divine Purpose book, with lots of nice pictures and graphics. Fantastic stuff, really, from the propaganda perspective. But it's a masterpiece of Jehovah's Witness propaganda, because the way it manages to spin all of the negatives into something that actually becomes self-praise by the time you've... Yeah. And it organizes the material in such a way that doesn't help you to get the impact of what the early history did. Yeah, because
they don't put it in chronological sequence. They put it thematically. I think that colors the picture somewhat by giving you enough space between to forget or to have kind of gone past that into something new, and there's always a spin that makes it positive. So they do history the way they do the Bible. The Bible in bits, history in bits.
Yeah, unfortunately.
They don't give you a clear picture when they do that.
But of course it was getting more difficult to do by the time this book comes out, because already James Penton has published Apocalypse Delayed. Ray Franz has actually published both his books before 1993 when this comes out. Dwayne Magnani's doing his work. David Reed, the Chrétiens, the Setnars are all out there doing wonderful work in the ex-witness community, and that didn't exist back when the Divine Purpose book was out. There were no ex-witness communities.
So you can kind of see what the purpose of doing it at this time is. It's damage control.
It's damage control, and I think you can see the way they're able to spin stuff, though, just by reading the foreword.
Okay.
So why don't we read those 2 short paragraphs in the foreword?
Jehovah's Witnesses are a people widely known. Their preaching and way of worship have penetrated national and racial groups worldwide and have been embraced by people, young and old, at every economic and educational level. Their zeal as proclaimers of God's kingdom has impressed even their critics. Their love toward one another makes some non-witnesses wish that more people acted that way. Yet many still wonder who really are Jehovah's Witnesses. Others have written about them, not always impartially. Probably they were not aware of all the facts. Certainly, no one knows their modern-day history better than they themselves do. The editors of this volume have endeavored to be objective and to present a candid history. To all who are aware of what the Bible foretells for the last days, this history of a people who intensely believe and preach what the Bible says will be especially enlightening. The publishers.
We can imagine you ex-witnesses who are listening to this choked probably several times on what we just read, just as we do. When they turned it into self-praise, such as in this line, their zeal as proclaimers of God's kingdom has impressed even their critics. Well, when you know what that zeal produced, that is the original documents, the books, the campaigns,
the messages,
yeah.
The dates. Yeah.
When you realize that their zeal as proclaimers of God's kingdom has impressed even their critics, well, no one's questioning Jehovah's Witnesses' zeal. What we're questioning is the message they've been zealously proclaiming.
Yeah. People oftentimes will say they admire them going door to door, but do they admire what they've been saying all these years?
And this emphasis that we still get in our comment section about, well, nobody else proclaims the kingdom. But what kingdom? It's the 1914 kingdom, and before that it was an 1878 kingdom. And it's always been an invisible presence of Jesus Christ. A lie. So what you're actually saying is that you were zealously proclaiming a message that was false.
Yeah.
And you've now been doing it for one more generation since this book came out. So 5 generations of proclaiming a false message zealously. Now, does that increase your credit with God, or does that actually make it worse? Make you more accountable to God? So what about the love? Their love toward one another makes some non-witnesses wish that more people acted that way.
Now, when I was a witness and pioneering and married to an elder and doing what I was, required to do, I did feel loved. But that changed quickly when I had any problems. That changed. And when I became a critic of the Watchtower, they just kill you. They just get rid of you. You're off the charts. Nobody's to talk to you. And they won't talk to you.
And that is different than other religions, which sometimes have exclusive claims as well. But the way the witnesses treat critics, that's the joke here that causes you to choke.
Yeah, they love their own when everything's going their way. So it's not unconditional love.
So what does Jesus say about those who love them?
You're like everybody else.
You're like everybody else in the world. Yeah. So this comment too about others have written about them, not always impartially. Who are the others who were well known by 1993 as writing about them? Well, they were ex-witnesses and experts at that, like James Penton.
So
and Ray
saying they
Franks.
probably were not aware of all the facts, the truth is they were aware of too many facts. That's what got us disfellowshipped.
You're getting
We found out the history, and when you know, you have to be silenced. Yeah.
And what was the line that choked you the most emphatically?
Oh, certainly no one knows the modern day history better than they themselves do. Really? I didn't know it when I was a witness. My parents didn't know it. The people I was talking to, they didn't seem to know the history. So they weren't reading their early stuff. They might have had it as a trophy on a shelf, some of them, but most of them just had modern day literature on their shelves, and they certainly weren't reading it.
They weren't reading the old books, and certainly they weren't getting what it calls here a candid history.
Yeah, and I mean,
an objective and candid history.
If they knew it, they wouldn't need to write this
Publish a 700-page book.
document that tells you the history that you already know, that everyone knows. No, they wouldn't have to do that. They're doing that because they have to. They're compelled to do it because now people are starting to find out about the history and speaking about it. So now we got to do some damage control, launder it a bit, and make it have a good spin on it.
So by the time this book came out, people were being baptized as Jehovah's Witnesses, and they were being baptized in association with God's Spirit-directed organization. And what cured you of knowing it was a Spirit-directed organization?
Yeah, I knew it was not a Spirit-directed organization because I read in chronological order the books of the Watchtower. And then you're soon cured of thinking that this is Spirit-directed. It can't be Spirit-directed if it makes this mistake and predicts this date and
the tone. Let's not forget the tone.
Yeah.
I think that disturbed you when I remember back. That disturbed you even more than the mistakes and the false prophecies.
They're so insistent that they're right all the time, no matter what they're saying, and everybody else is wrong.
So the slander goes right along with the arrogance.
Yeah.
And that's what's missing from this book, and that's what's missing from the Divine Purpose book.
Yeah.
It's all neutralized by we're admitting our faults. We have faults, and we will continue to make mistakes. We're not claiming to be perfect. That I think we called it in our slaves tract, 15 million stolen lives. We called it a iron fist and a velvet glove. That approach, which they take in their modern literature.
So there's no confessions attached to admissions.
No moral blame.
It's just admissions that, well, we might have said this, and you don't get the tone at all because it's just a phrase in a new book. So it's not giving you the full picture.
And I couldn't help but remember that proverb that I'd been told was important in assessing moral guilt in those that might be disfellowshipped for this or that fault. When I was an elder, I was told those that confess their sins and leave them will be shown mercy. I don't see true confession going on here.
And they don't leave their mistakes. They go on doing the same thing, just a new spin or a new date.
We didn't know, of course, when the book came out, that they were building up to another
big
major change.
Yeah.
That, of course, was the generation
overlapping
change.
generations. Yeah.
That I don't know if the governing body in those days was even aware of what they were going to do, but they were building up to it, as we now know.
Yeah.
And that, of course, was the breaking off with a consistent theme of the prior 4 generations, this generation.
Yeah.
So we're planning to go through the whole book, and you could probably tell even from the tone of this video, it's going to be a lot of frustration and vexation revisiting this subject, because we haven't really gone to this book for, close to 30 years now.
Yeah. I didn't read it fully. I read bits and pieces, and that was enough. But we'll read.
But we think it's a necessary work, because the masterpiece of propaganda, they're still doing it. They're still treating their paths as if they're not accountable for the sordid history, the scandals, but especially for the false prophecy and for the arrogance and the slander, which disqualify you if you're claiming to be God's people. So we'll read through the whole book and leave out the parts that are not of relevant interest, because a lot of the book, like the prior book and like the 75-year book, that also had a lot of
Go
historical
into
materials.
personal testimonies.
And of course that's relatively harmless, but every denomination and every cult on earth has personal testimonies. And that's what I think in your heart as a witness, that tends to convince you that your people are sincere. They want to do the right, and I think they do. Most Jehovah's Witnesses want to do the right thing, but they're at the mercy of a ruthless organization, and it's getting more apparent all the time, the arrogance of the governing body members themselves. So we hope to cover most of the book and comment on it as we go. And please excuse us in advance for any very visible or audible frustration we may exhibit. See you next time.